Time for another episode of Brio TV, the podcast. I'm your host, Bill Brio. Hello, everybody, and thank you once again for listening to Brio TV, the podcast. Just a quick note off the top of the show. Today's guest, my friend John Doyle, retired from the Globe and Mail, but boy, this guy is still all over the TV scene, and always a pleasure to talk with John. One of the things we talked about during the podcast that you're about to hear is the impact of the writers and actors strikes on TV production. And, you know, wouldn't you know it, as soon as we wrapped our conversation, hours later, the announcement came out, the actors' strike is over. And that's great news for everybody in production and viewers. And so wanted to make that distinction before we get into it. But the good news is, after 6 months, the actors' strike has ended. Here we go with John Doyle. Today's special guest. Now, for 25 years, while at the Globe and Mail, this gentleman was the guy you read first to get the real story on television in Canada. Now he's the envy of every other TV critic because he's retired. Please welcome my friend John Doyle. John, good to see you again.
Thank you, Bill. It is always a great pleasure. And thank you for that nice, short introduction. I do speaking engagements and things occasionally, and if you do that, you become a kind of connoisseur of introductions. And the one that I'm always very wary of, it's the long-winded one that goes, you know, John Doyle was born in Ireland in 1950 something. He entered University College Dublin, and he came to Canada he joined the Globe and Mail because as journalists, you and I both know that's the obituary.
Yeah. And also it's a mood. It's like a room killer if it goes on too long, right? I mean, I remember many years ago, you remember Don Herron. He used to appear as Charlie Farquharson. He was the,
of course,
you know, with the crazy hat and the country bumpkin with all the mangled language. And I was asked to MC an event, and we booked him as the talent. So I checked with him as how he would want to be introduced. And he literally said, short as possible, just say, here he is, a man outstanding in his field, Charlie Farquharson. Like, don't introduce me as Don Herron. Just introduce me as Charlie. Don't go, because I'm sure he went to places, and the kiss of death is when they go, here he is, the funniest man you've ever met, Don Herron. And you know, you can't overcome that, right? So I always remember his advice: just say it and get out of the way. And there we go. But listen, tell me more about the speaking engagements, John.
Oh, I occasionally speak to groups, often to reading groups. There are several reading groups that I've been speaking to every year for years. Sometimes it's about a book. Often it's about a book that has been adapted for television. And we can compare and contrast the TV version with the original book. One I did not long ago was actually about the book and the series called Roar, which is on Apple TV. It's an anthology series, and based on a collection of stories by the Irish writer Cecilia Ahern. Cecilia is a very well-known and successful writer over there. She's the daughter of a former Prime Minister of Ireland. And the adaptations done for Apple are fascinating because they take things, the core of the stories, the action out of the Irish context and do them in another, mostly a US context. But the sort of set of variables that happen between this book and the TV series made for a very interesting talk for me. and I think the audience was interested in it. So, I do things like that, and which, keeps me busy and keeps me engaged.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea, and it must be effective. Your listeners must love it. I am like you. We're talking about this is a series from Ireland. One of the shows I'm most looking forward to, the third season of Slow Horses, is coming up later this month. And we're seeing a lot partially because of the U.S. actors and writers strike. There's much more content I'm finding from the UK on TV right now. Are you finding the same?
Yes, there is. It varies in quality. This always happens when there's a shortage because of a strike. There is a kind of desperation to get, especially to get English language content on the air. There's a series called Bodies on Netflix right now, I believe, which got some praise, which I didn't like at all. I thought it was overrated. There's way too much gore in it. It's one of those shows that has an interesting concept, but the plot is being moved along when a dead body is on a table and is being carved up, and
Okay.
if that's the highlight of the hour, let's go back to characters.
But it sounds like you just described every CSI episode ever, too, there, in a way.
Well, this is more of gory and grisly in a very British way.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure you also are speaking about books to television. That was the case with Slow Horses as well. You're a fan of those books as well, right?
I am. Heron's books are wonderful. They're very funny. They were as funnier than the TV series. There are some lines that, if you read the books, are not going to make it on TV. They're just too rude, even for Gary Oldman's character to say. They're satiric, and they're very shrewd about contemporary British politics.
Wow.
You can figure out who the character that is based on Boris Johnson. You can figure out other major figures in recent British politics and who are figures in the book, likely disguised sometimes. But Heron's books are wonderful. I have 2 more to read that I'm sort of saving for the Christmas New Year's period as a treat for myself.
Wow. Well, thank goodness there's not a Canadian equivalent where you're trying to guess which character is Doug Ford or Pierre Polyev, or I suppose, although now that I say it, that may not be such a bad idea.
It's a great idea, but Canadian television, as we know, is very reluctant to go in those directions.
Well, we're not. And this is one reason why I love talking to you, because let's get right into the Canadian television scene. We're here many, many months into the strikes that began in the U.S. way back in April, I think, the writer's strike. That was settled, but the actors are still negotiating as of our talk today on November the 8th. And I've thought, John, here we are. Canada's always had this heavy weight of trying to get out from under all of this really pricey and big name talent American television. So this fall, it's like, well, you know what? One of the nice sides of this is there's an opportunity. You're not facing the stiff competition every night from NCI this or Law and Order that. But I don't know if we're seeing any lift in Canadian TV. I recently asked a few of the networks. CTV put out a release saying they're number one. Again, it's 22nd year. But no one's getting too specific about the numbers. CBC did, to the extent that they said the ratings have stayed the same, which these days on broadcast is a win. But do you think that, well, we've talked about CBC a lot, but have they missed an opportunity by targeting genres to try and bring TV to people who haven't had an opportunity to have their stories told before. Very lofty goal, but it's not a broadcast in the broad sense of the word. Do you think CBC maybe has missed an opportunity this fall?
I do. I think Canadian television in general is missing opportunities to showcase Canadian talent, Canadian storytelling, and especially the wit and humor that is an inherent part of the Canadian culture. CBC is its own beast and its own worst enemy.
Right.
I didn't notice that coming. I think first quarter of next year, CBC is going back to what looks like a police procedural.
Yes.
A show called Allegiance,
yes,
which comes from some of the people involved in Flashpoint.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
several of the actors are veterans of crime shows. I found that an interesting twist in that it does seem to be moving away from CBC's recent insistence on making shows about people that are characters whose voices would have been suppressed in the past, whose voices would not have been heard, whose experiences would not been part of the fabric of drama, to shift to what looks like a broad appeal police procedural. First of all, I think it's good that some of the traditional genres are being reawakened on Canadian television. That doesn't mean I would diminish or dilute those shows, like Sort of, which gave voice to trans people, to trans people from different non-white cultures. All of that, some of that kind of material worked very well, but having as big a tent pole, as they say in the business, I think it is always a good idea.
Yeah, I do too. I'm just happy to see Rico Colantoni as one of the leads of the Legions, and he's such a fine actor. He was the second guy I talked to when we started doing these podcasts. Lovely man and tremendous actor. And it's done with the guys he worked with, you're right, at Flashpoint, Mark Ellis and Stephanie. Universal is a partner to this, so I suspect that's part of the deal. Is this is a show that will also eventually or right away be on Paramount or Peacock, or Bravo or a U.S. window. So it's a big show, and I think the big shows are what CBC lacks. So I'm glad to see them give this a shot. Right.
Yes. My personal viewing is quite eclectic. I have no problem with a cop show if it's well written, if it has a sense of humor, or if it's compelling.
Yeah.
I will watch it. It sounds to me like Allegiance is not a show with an agenda.
Yeah, other than to entertain and draw an audience. I think it'll be very interesting to see. And really, if people are watching broadcast, if you're still watching broadcast, these are the shows you're looking for. It's either this or Survivor or a reality show, really, or sports. That's sort of what drives broadcasting today. So better be in that business, I think.
It's interesting you mentioned broadcast, because one of the absent shows because of the actor strike, and before that the writer strike, that I genuinely miss is Abbott Elementary, a comedy on ABC, a workplace comedy, oldest genre in the book in terms of TV entertainment, but such a bright, funny, startlingly vivid, good-humored show with a certain amount of zing to it. That's one of the rare shows from broadcast that has been truly outstanding in the last couple of years. And it's a show that I really miss.
Yeah, a lot of critics absolutely love Abbott Elementary, and hopefully we may not see a new episode of that till next September, right? That's the thing. It's going to take a while. And now talk about comedy on broadcast. Here's the irony. So nothing's going on. There's no new Connors episodes or young Sheldon or whatever. So the CW, our buddy Brad down at the CW, he goes and buys every funny show in Canada. So he's got Run the Burbs, Children Ruin Everything, Moonshine, sort of a drama comedy, Son of a Critch. I don't know if he's managed to move the needle much with any of this stuff. It's a fascinating experiment to see if American audience would embrace such a regional East Coast show like Son of a Critch, but that's the aim across Canada. So, any thoughts about Canadian comedies exporting to the U.S.?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Bill, because I think the CW stood a better chance of those what are regional shows to American audiences being embraced. And that's one of the benefits of streaming over the last few years, is that a hot show on Netflix or Amazon Prime, if it's from another country with subtitles, if it's a hot show, a buzz show that people are talking about, audiences will go to it. They are much less likely to be put off by a show not having familiar American stars and familiar American situations and familiar American storytelling. In the case of that batch of shows, I'm really delighted to see Son of a Critch getting an audience. It may well be a tiny audience in the States, but getting an audience and getting praise for its Newfoundland humor, for the wit and sagacity and the actors and the sort of wonky sense of humor that is an inherent part of Son of a Critch. I don't know if the people involved have been in LA and are taking meetings with agents and casting directors. I would hope that Son of a Critch does well out of it. I think with the others, it's been very much been a mixed bag in terms of the reaction to them. I think my impression is audiences and critics were a bit puzzled by Run the Burbs,
right?
Which is a very Toronto show, a very sort of Toronto multicultural suburbs show. The thing is, though, I mean, we will applaud that here. I think what viewers and certainly some critics noticed in the States is that the tone changes on Run the Burbs. I mean, it's a show that has a speedy sense of humor for a while, or for part of one episode, and then it kind of dinks into something that is utterly absurd or that is a cliche. It's not a smooth running machine.
No. Well, they went out and got new showrunners, for the next season, which to address that very issue, I think, because you're right, I would watch and go, what happened to the thing they just set up for 10 minutes and why, so it was all over the map and needed to be pulled together in at least one direction. You're right. Yeah.
Moonshine, I think, is part of that batch, isn't it? Is Moonshine?
Moonshine is absolutely part of that batch. Yeah.
Now, are you aware of how it has gone over in the States? Because I'm not.
I need to find out. I don't. I will see if I can get in touch with our buddy Brad Schwartz and get some sort of insight. But so I don't. I know that the brilliant idea, what he did there, though, is he needed content, and he had reached across the border and he had 3 seasons of Moonshine. It's going to be 3 seasons of Run the Burbs and Children Ruin Everything. So it was a wonderful solution to this dearth of programming that he had to address, especially at CW, which lost all the superhero shows that they had used to show, right? So, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I wish everyone well. My initial reviews of some of those shows in Canada might have been a bit lukewarm, especially Moonshine and Children Ruin Everything, but I wish them all the best. We hear a great deal as you and I know from people in the Canadian TV industry, about the limits there are to success in Canada, about frustrations they have with the broadcaster. So, I mean, most of these people are hardworking, talented people, and if they get a break out of being shown on the CW in the States, good for them.
Yeah, it would be nice to see a kid like Malcolm McDowell get a break. Finally, you know, I love it's my favorite comedy, a sitcom on TV. It has been for the last few years. But and I often think too of the show. I like Ricky Gervais's show Afterlife. You know, I have no connection to a small town, you know, north of London where that show was set. You know, it was a bit foreign to me, but I loved every minute of it. And I do think,
too.
Yeah, these shows can translate, right?
If it has an emotional texture to it that people connect with, it doesn't matter where it is set.
Right. Yeah. No, it's shows from Scandinavia or Korea or wherever now are doing the same thing. Back after these short messages with John Doyle. Have you been watching the new reboot of Frasier on Paramount Plus? Kelsey Grammer, who played the fussy psychiatrist for 20 consecutive seasons on Cheers and Frasier, has moved back to Boston. Besides Frasier, Paramount Plus has the new Taylor Sheridan Western, Lawmen, Bass Reeves. The anthology series aims to profile a different Old West hero every season. This one is about a one-time slave who becomes the first U.S. black marshal. Dennis Quaid and Donald Sutherland also star. There's also The Curse, the latest from Toronto native Nathan Fielder. Fielder teams with Emma Stone as a couple taking on various challenges, including trying to conceive a child and trying to escape an alleged curse. Expect plenty of awkward weirdness. Finally, check out the latest in the NCIS franchise, NCIS Sydney. That's right, there's a Naval Criminal Investigative Service in Australia. Crikey, throw another crook on the Barbie. And remember, there's a mountain of entertainment on Paramount Plus. It's time once again to speak with Emily Gagne at Hollywood Suite. Emily, what do you got for us this month?
Well, it's Noir-vember, so we have a ton of noir films for you to watch this month. But if you're not into that, we have every Dirty Harry film ever made available to watch this month.
Wow, that's a lot of Dirty Harry films.
It is. We are premiering the Deadpool, which is not to be confused with Deadpool, which is the last film in the series. But if you're not into that stuff, we also have the premiere of Neil Young's Heart of Gold, and we're premiering that on his birthday, which is great. And for the people that are getting excited about Christmas and the holiday season, we have 'Tis the Season, which is a documentary about holiday films from throughout cinematic history, which is sort of leading me into the treat that we have coming for people.
What's that?
It's December 1st to January 5th. We have a free preview across Canada with broadcast providers, so you can watch hundreds of films for free. But, you know, get a sneak peek this month with our Noir-vember program.
Holy smoke, talk about make my day. Free preview coming up. Lots of great films in November from Hollywood Suite. Here he is again, your TV pal and mine, John Doyle. Here's something you and I have talked about. You brought this up, the effect of the actor strike on late night talk shows. You know, they sat for ages. Those 5 late night hosts, Jimmy Kimmel, everybody even went so far. This is how bored they were, John. They started doing podcasts. Anyway, they came back, but yeah, if I turn in Fallon and he's saying, "Oh, here he is. He's on Broadway right now," or you know, like it wasn't the usual guest list, and they were vamping a bit more with their own shtick, but it seems to lack a little oomph these days, right?
Oh, well, I missed the late night shows when they were off the air because of the writer's strike. I mean, it was one of those realizations that they are actually a part of my life. TV critic or not, I, like other people, use, two or three of the late night shows to sort of take the temperature of things in the US. It's often a very interesting contrast to news coverage. If you've been watching a CNN or MSNBC of a day or evening when there's big news in the States, you turn on the late night shows, you're getting a very different take on it. You're getting, and you're often getting a better feel for what's going on in the US. And I was really interested to see the first week of returning shows. I thought Kimmel was very rusty. He was very shaky the first few nights he was back. It was like he had wiped everything from his mind and needed to be reminded. Guillermo was sharper than Kimmel was.
Well, don't forget, Jimmy, he was just getting over COVID. He got a late batch of the pandemic there, so that probably didn't help.
Yeah. Colbert was also a bit rusty, I think, but recovered pretty quickly. I'm not a huge fan of Colbert, but I was interested to see the return. Fallon, I paid no attention to. I find Fallon too bland.
Right.
Seth Meyers, I thought, was superb.
Right.
Yes. His opening show when he came back was a tour de force of comedy. He did, his signature is a closer look.
Right.
His sort of rant with images about events of the day or a topic of the week. And he essentially did an hour-long version of a closer look. And it was superb. It had so many comedy beats. It was vivid and fresh. And it was just such a relief to see Seth Meyers back in that forum and delivering the kind of material he's known for without missing a step after being off the air for months.
Well, I think of all those guys, he's the writer, and he was head writer at Saturday Night Live, and it did seem like he had bottled up a lot of stuff, and he just let it rip. And the thing about Meyers, I remember before, just as he was getting that job, being down in LA at the TCA press tour and talking to other people, some of his contemporaries, how do you think Seth will do? And they all said he'll kill, because he's the guy that you could invite over to have dinner with your parents, and they would be just as charmed and laughing just as hard as you would. That he had this ability to sort of be welcome at any table. And I think that's true, but I also think in the new Seth that we're seeing now, little more edge, right?
Oh, there is a very sharp edge with Seth Meyers. He opens almost every show with a joke about Joe Biden. There's Trump material, but no, he is razor sharp, and he is focused on the absurdity of American politics and the absurdities of American life in a political context. And he also, I think, Meyers does an interesting thing where he does make the writers very much part of the show.
Yeah.
And he addresses the writers on the show. He has them on as guests. He does this thing where in the monologue, if a joke he thinks is falling flat, he points to who wrote it, and it's not accusatory. It's a very kind of joshing, friendly kind of way, but it gives you the sense that Seth Meyers' show works as a team, and that's part of what makes it a better show. As we found out towards the end of the writer's strike, Fallon's show, The Tonight Show with Fallon, had a lot of problems, especially with Fallon's alleged behavior towards his staff. Late night all those shows exist in a strange bubble, and they can be a pleasure to work in, or clearly it can be hell to work in those shows.
Yeah. Kimmel gets surrounded by hiring relatives.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the charm too.
It is. It absolutely is. And I love how Meyers too, he is able to address in his humor and his comedy, points of view that are not his own. He brings, if it's a female writer or a black writer, different ethnicities. They have their funny perspective on the same joke he's telling, and that really casts a wide net, makes it quite fascinating.
Yes, I think it is part of the smarts of the show. I don't know if it probably was Seth Meyers' own idea, but what he's essentially doing is saying, listen, I'm a middle-aged white guy. And, all late night shows are hosted by middle-aged white guys. So let's deal with that issue by having these writers, the writers on the show from different backgrounds and perspectives. Let's make them part of it to sort of maybe take away from this straight middle-aged white guy shtick that so many of them have.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant move. And speaking of middle-aged white guys, let's talk a bit about Bill Maher. This is a show I never miss. I love Real Time with Bill Maher, even though he is, and maybe because he is my age, a year or two older. But I just find that, and not everyone does. My son can't stand Bill Maher because he's a generation that doesn't quite embrace this guy. But I do think if you're looking for two sides of something, one of the few places to find a great debate about these things is on Real Time with Bill Maher. I just think when he has the right guests, this is an hour that's very electric. Is this a show you watch, John?
I watch occasionally, Bill, and I watched two recent episodes because you mentioned this as Bill Maher as a topic to talk about today, because I'd gotten tired of Bill Maher. I used to admire him a lot, and there are still shows that are, as you say, electric. He's great guests, intelligent, articulate guests, experts in certain areas that would not make for great talk show guests in other TV arenas.
Right.
He's good. He's very good. He can be very sharp. But there are two things about Bill Maher that I think diminish his stature. One, he's a crank. And second, he's a codger.
Right.
And by the crank, I mean he has so many bees in his bonnet. I mean, he is fixated on things like regulation. He doesn't like regulation. He tried to get a solar panel put in his house in LA, and it took such a long time that led to so many of what became boring rants about regulation. Well, Bill Maher, that's life. Live in any city, you can't fight City Hall. They have bylaws and regulations. You can't do anything you want. He's a crank about sugar. I think he was a crank about masking and vaccinations, and his approach to the whole COVID crisis, I think, was off. I think it was wrong. He should have paid more attention to medical experts and less to his own ego. And also, I think on that sort of crank part of it, there was a strain of Islamophobia in some of what Bill Maher does. He takes it a bit too far. And when he tries to be funny about it, it's not funny. Mm-hmm. So that's the crank part, and then there's the codger part, which is just he tends to do way too much of that kids today thing. He looks on teenagers and 20-somethings as all being woke, but not actually awake to the reality of the world. He goes too far with it. I would agree. Sometimes his show can be brilliant, informative, and the guests in particular can give you a perspective on an issue you're not going to get anywhere else. But Maher himself, I can take it or leave it. I would not watch every week because I don't want to get insulted by that crank.
Well, I know what you mean, and I agree. His biggest shortcoming is his blinders on when he's talking about younger generations, that he seems to believe that it's all boomers or the only club to belong to. So he clearly, except for maybe some of the women he dates, does not hang out with a lot of young people because he would have to be impressed by a lot of them. This is a generation that has grown up with more information than any other. And there's a lot of smart, bright young people. But I do enjoy that when he has the right guests on, and you're talking about heavy topics that others aren't really diving into, like Gaza, like the war in the Middle East right now, that you're getting insights from experts that are where I'm just not seeing in that kind of an arena anywhere else, right?
You're right about that. You're not going to see those guests on CNN or MSNBC. They often are truly experts. These are people who have studied in an area or a question. They've written books about it, and they know how to be articulate about it. Articulately. Part of the issue I suspect with someone like Bill Maher is that he doesn't really get out enough. I mean, he's in this showbiz bubble in LA, and he goes to Vegas to do his stand-up. And that's pretty much his world. And that if you're in that bubble, you are not open to the perspectives of other people, other generations, people who work in other areas of life.
Yeah. Once he went off he was joking about, what is this thing? MailChimp. What is this? A monkey? What? And I thought, I use this every week to put together a newsletter for my podcast. Seriously? You don't know what MailChimp is? So yeah, he does need to get out more, maybe not just to the studio and to Vegas. And, but I still am glad he's on the air. Let's talk then to real news, which, the ratings for CNN and different places all sagged once Trump kind of got off the radar for a few months. I don't know if they've hustled back. We were wondering about ratings of news in Canada. From what I gather, CTV is still the front runner. They recently announced they're going to do a new early evening edition of CTV National News with Sandy Ronaldo now, weekdays at 5:30. As well as the CTV National News with Omar Sachedina. What does that sort of say, John? It says to me that people are not really tuning in to their newscasts at 11 p.m. anymore. It's just too late. Boomers are getting too old for this, and they're the ones generally watching. Is this a smart strategy to try to do a national newscast earlier, as Global does? Can anything sort of reignite or bring people together to watch news at a certain time and place?
Well, you're right about much of that, Bill. I think if there's one thing that can bring people together to watch news on television at a certain daily time, and that is war. Right. People want to find out what happened today in the war. I mean, as gruesome as that might be, how many people died? Was there a major breakthrough by one side or the other? Is there any hope of peace? What are the politicians saying about it? So I do think it is smart for CTV to move to an earlier, a sub-hour national news program. And it's probably something they should have done years ago. That may have been part of the reason why the former host or anchor of CTV National News before Omar left the job. I can only speculate on that. But I would worry if I was in the broadcast TV news business, because it's not just television news that is being impacted by changes in the culture. There was one major survey done recently. I think it might have been a Thomson Reuters survey, which indicates that there is a steady decline of interest in consuming the news from multiple platforms, whether it's online news, newspapers online, websites, television news, radio, even news through your social media feeds. There is just less interest in it. People people are finding, and this I think is part of the continuing impact of the COVID period, is that people are inclined to live inside their own niche. They want news that has an impact on them, that is about their community, that is about their circle of friends, that is about the things they are interested in, the theater they're interested in, the TV they're interested in, the books they read. An interest, it's a sort of footnote to this, but TikTok is huge. One of the things that TikTok has helped is the book business. Books on TikTok, huge subject. People connect on TikTok about books they're reading, about books they should read. It's now a whole arena unto itself. And changes like that, I think, don't augur well for the traditional news business. I don't know what's going to happen. I still watch CTV News at 11 occasionally. Mm-hmm. I'll check it for a few minutes. I almost never watch the National on CBC.
Like a lot of Canadians.
Yes. I mean, I tuned in to the At Issue panel recently, and after about 5 minutes was thinking, what am I doing?
It's more fun to listen to Mansbridge's podcast, where he has his old At Issue pals, because they can wing it a little more. It sounds like they're all drinking when they do it now for the podcast. It's more fun. But John, I think too, if you watch, all you have to do is watch the national newscasts of the United States at the supper hour. And there's the tip off that they're giving you their boom, boom, boom news. And then after 15 minutes, there's 15 ads for products to try to extend your life. And then there's so it's literally they're desperately trying to reach people who are quite old, because those are the ones who are still watching nightly newscasts.
Yes. And in terms of the cable news in the States, I think there has been, it's probably since we last spoke, there have been some interesting shifts. CNN is still trying to find its feet after a very strange period where a new executive made some extraordinary decisions. I miss Don Lemon, I watch Don Lemon these days. CNN is still trying to find its feet in terms of a coverage that connects with people. Fox News is not doing as well as it did. It is not dominating the ratings in cable news in the States. It has diminished. That's a post-Trump thing, I suspect. But I think the disappearance of Tucker Carlson was very interesting, because Tucker Carlson was promoting so many conspiracy theories and out there, outlandish ideas about the United States that really he became intolerable even to the top bosses at Fox News.
The Murdochs,
I think MSNBC is doing better than expected. Rachel Maddow has a phenomenal following, even though she's often only on once a week these days. When she's on, her ratings beat Fox, CNN, Fox News, and CNN easily. And that, I think, is a really interesting fact, is that someone like Maddow, who tends to talk at length, but tends to have what Americans would call a left-wing perspective on things. She remains a star.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in all of that, there's some interesting things there. I mean, you talked about how Fox News was creating something that wasn't really news, right? And they were maybe they got ahead of the curve on that, and that's why people were watching. My theory, John, is people are scared. They're frightened. They don't want to watch the news. It's scary times. And if you can put together a show that is a bunch of crazy theories and stuff, that's a little less unsettling, you know. And I also think the whole thing, this whole deal about, oh my goodness, your social media, you can no longer get your newscast now. This is let's blame Meta for doing this because they're stopping you from putting links to newscasts up there. And I think a lot of people are going, thank God. Like, I don't want this stuff on my feed anymore. I think it really, really backfired because there's just a general, I don't know if we're worn out or worn down by the news messages, which is a generalization, I know, but I think that's one reason why Survivor is the number one show in Canada. It's just an escape. And I think the news is a hard sell these days.
Well, everybody likes distraction, and familiar distractions like Survivor. I can understand the success of that, but I also see a failure in local television news. I live right in downtown Toronto, a city that has changed a great deal in the last few years. It is, as many people who live here know, a city that feels like it's falling apart. It's a more dangerous city. It's a less pleasant city. The infrastructure doesn't function. The TTC is terrible. Traffic is terrible. There is violence. Innocent people shot. And I don't see the local news on either CBC, CTV, or CP24. I don't see them covering any of this adequately. I think they are all a fail in terms of coverage of a city that often feels like it's coming apart at the seams. There's a column in the Toronto Star today. One of the columnists described Toronto as a city that stopped trying. Wow. And I think there was a lot, and there's truth to that. There's an awful lot that's bad going on in this city. And what I see when I look at the local news is the same old thing. They stick to announcements, press releases, press conferences. They lead with a car accident or somebody being shot in North York or Scarborough, and there was very little context for this. It feels thrown together last minute, no thought going into it. And I think you really do have to put thought into it if you're going to cover this city that really is going through a very difficult time right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, that perspective. You're right. I know when years ago when City TV was launching and kind of changed the face of local news, that was their whole philosophy, was bring us a story from that on your street, right? It was that specific, and those were the news. Those messages were brought to you by people who looked like your neighbors and friends, and I think that was very effective. And you're right, you don't get that today. Everything is, the brevity and the short attention of it is frustrating if you're really trying to get any solid information or help. And I live outside of the Toronto, and when I visit, I have the same unease about it because it was a city I grew up in. And even on social media now, I'll get these retro feeds. It'll be a picture of Bathurst and Bloor in 1972, and there's looks like fields around the subway station. I sent this to my son Dan, who lives down there, and I said, Dan, I was 10 when this picture was taken in 1967. It looks like Oliphant. It looks like Sauble Beach, and so the city has changed, tremendous growth in those years, but they just didn't keep up with the infrastructure or the taxes or whatever it took to manage to make this more of a utopian vision that it to me it used to be.
I'll give you one example. In my neighborhood here, there's been quite a controversy in the last 2 months about a new 24-hour low-barrier respite center being put into the neighborhood, which will be very close to a safe injection site and close to a shelter as well. Local people, especially parents, have objected to the fact that this center is going to be placed immediately adjacent to an elementary school. where small children will be literally 30 seconds walk from this respite center. There have been protests about this. There was a protest one day that might have had 80 or 100 people at a public meeting on the street with placards, one or two politicians there. The CP24 story about this issue had about 30 seconds of coverage of the protests, which had about 80 or 100 people. And then in the studio, they had one person who was in favor of this respite center going in where the city wants to put it. The context that the headline, the on-screen headline used for this was a community divided. Well, a community divided it's not a community divided if you find one person and there are 80 or 100 people out on the street. Mm. There was no sense of any context, any nuance for this issue. Because it's happening right around the corner from me, I had a real sense of what's going on with this, with the issue. I got no sense of that from CP24's coverage.
Why do you think that is, John? What is it? Is it just because they only have 30 seconds to tell that story, or are there other reasons?
Well, the actual protest got about 30 seconds of coverage. The one person on the other side of the issue was in the studio for about 5 minutes. I think it's just laziness. It's like find one person and ignore 80 or 100 people, and it's somebody's idea of balance. There is a certain amount of laziness in local news in Toronto because the stories seem to often present themselves as a car crash, as a murder, as a hit and run incident. Local news traditionally doesn't give you a lot of nuance, but given the strange shape that Toronto is in as a city these days, somebody, apart from one or two columnists in the Toronto Star, need to go deeper.
It's a challenge. I know. The other day I was sitting in a car repair place in Etobicoke getting the Swedish Princess fixed again, and they had a TV screen on CP24, and it was just a series of the headlines. You're reading the crawl, and you're seeing these pieces come up and up and up, and this churn of information. And to me, it was just like scrolling my phone. It was the same speed and ratio. Like, I don't know if they've actually programmed it that way, but there's such a sameness to the message that you stop paying attention in a way, right?
You're right. And there are way too many things on the screen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There's like 7, 8, 9 things on the screen.
Yeah, weather and traffic and everything else. Don't go away. I'll be back with John in just a moment.
Around here it's called a person blues.
Well, you've loved her on Mary Makes It Easy. Now she's cooking up a whole new series called The Good Stuff with Mary Berg. What's it all about, Mary?
It's called The Good Stuff with Mary Berg. And when we were talking about it and kind of developing the idea and working through what it was actually going to look like, the main thing we kept coming back to is just filling people's lives up. And that doesn't mean with like always big flashy things, but just sharing stories from people doing good things from across Canada, sharing stories from people who are maybe more well-known who are doing good things. There will obviously still be food. Every day I'm going to cook something up that you can make at home, have cook-alongs with different chefs, hopefully get some guests to cook along because I want to convince people that anybody can actually cook. Wow. But I'm really excited to learn. I'm a lifelong trier and I am so looking forward to learning from the different experts we're going to have on.
That's The Good Stuff with Mary Berg, weekdays at 10 a.m. on CTV. What's new this month on Super Channel? Well, the royal mob's still at it. Think the Sopranos were a murderous crime family? Forget about it. Fact is, Great Britain's royal family had control of much of Europe and beyond under Queen Victoria. This series combines scripted drama with commentary from expert historians to tell the tale of one of the most compelling, powerful, yet dysfunctional families in history. If that series makes you lose faith in humanity, be of good cheer. Every Friday, there are also new episodes of The Chosen about the life and times of Jesus Christ. And by the last week of November, Super Channel's Heart and Home channel will be unpacking their annual gift bag full of holiday movies. 'Tis the season. And remember, Super Channel, an all-Canadian service, is available via cable providers across the country, as well as streaming live on demand with Amazon Prime Video channels and Apple TV+. You can also check out the new streaming channel, Super Channel Plus, available now on the Roku platform in Canada. Talking to John Doyle here, but all things TV, solving all the problems. Thank God he's with us. We're going to dump into a prickly pear here. This whole Buffy St. Marie thing. This is a few weeks ago now, but the Fifth Estate did a documentary challenging her Indigenous ancestry, her claims. And it raised quite a controversy. Did you watch this show, John? Do you have an opinion on it?
I didn't watch it, but I, like every Canadian, I certainly knew about it, and I read CBC's online account of the making of the documentary and why it was made and what it exposed and what it delivered to viewers. I don't think there's any point in blaming CBC if you're of a mind that Buffy St. Marie is 80-something years old, and why take her down now? Why do that? CBC News and Current Affairs, the documentary unit, whatever department, had the information. And when you have that information, you can't bury it. I think what people fail to understand, and this is partly CBC's fault, is that this kind of programming is now a high priority for CBC. It puts Indigenous issues higher on its list of priorities than it used to do. Mm-hmm. That's up to CBC. That's their decision. And as we know, they do a lot of coverage of Indigenous issues. The Buffy St. Marie documentary was part of that. That doesn't bother me. The only thing that does is that I felt as a critic, and I feel as a consumer and writer now, that CBC is not open about this. It has never fully explained to its radio listeners, its TV viewers, its online audience, what its list of priorities are. And it really should do that. I think that's the fault of executives at the top of CBC. A broadcaster of the size and strengths of CBC should not be failing on the message of explaining to viewers what its priorities are and what it's doing and why it's doing it.
Yeah, interesting. I know I don't have all the ratings I used to get, but CBC did share that their most watched news magazine now, not the Fifth Estate, it's Marketplace. Mm-hmm. I think that's telling. People are really more curious, need more information about why they can't afford groceries anymore than almost anything else, right? It's a very specific thing that hits you in the pocketbook, and that's the show that they're watching.
You're absolutely right, and I think that's an issue also for local news in a city like Toronto. You need to tell stories about people's day-to-day lives, about their worries, which are about inflation, their kids' schools, their kids' safety, and you need to tell those stories with a certain kind of empathy for ordinary people who have worries like that. Instead of making everything about policy announcements from government and advocacy groups, storytelling that has an empathy for ordinary people's lives and the stresses and strains in those lives, I think that's a way forward. I think if you look at news outlets that are doing well, in part, I mean, New York Times. I mean, what is one of the most popular aspects of the New York Times that people subscribe for? The recipes.
Right.
You know, I mean, we can chuckle at that, but it's a truth. It's it's that's part of what the Times does well. The other thing the Times does well is consumer information. Through the New York Times, you want to buy a new electric kettle or a coffee maker. New York Times can help you find the one that's best for you with expert reviews. It's based on cost, and they don't want to bullshit you. They want to give you real information that's useful for you. And that's a growth industry in news, and I think it's the way of the future.
It literally reaches you at a gut level. Yeah. And, but what you just described, John, it literally is, to me, I was listening and thinking you just diagnosed exactly what's wrong with the National. Sometimes I'll be watching and there'll be somebody talking about experts for 13 minutes about something that not everybody's that interested in, and you don't really find the story that you really were hoping to get. So hopefully somebody's listening and they'll correct it a bit, but let's hurry off to I want to get into these last couple of things here. Okay, so a couple of shows have announced some final seasons of Canadian shows. Just going to list the 3 or 4 here. Transplant after 4 seasons, Letterkenny after 75 episodes, Sort of. This is going to be the 3rd and final season, and ET Canada after 18 years. Is there one there that you would miss more than the others?
Well, Letterkenny is an interesting instance. I do think it's time to finish Letterkenny after all those seasons. I adore that show, and a uniquely Canadian success, a very clever show. I think always underrated in terms of its style, its cleverness, the acuity of Letterkenny. But I think it might be time to bring it to an end. Shoresy, the spin-off, is a show I adore too. I think Shoresy is a kind of rollicking smart Canadian comedy that succeeds. Transplant, I suspect, as with some medical shows, it just reached the brick wall. It's difficult to keep medical shows like Transplant going without introducing new storylines, new characters, without expanding the show. The first couple of seasons of Transplant were excellent. It was great Canadian storytelling, and I think we did well in the States too. We'd got some very good reviews and good ratings in the States, but without a big investment in keeping it going, a show like that reaches a brick wall. Sort of disappoints me that after 3 seasons it's done. Again, first season was sterling, absolutely outstanding show. Wonderful show. The warmth, it's funny, and the granular picture of Toronto that it gave you was lovely to see. I think second season kind of dissipated a bit. The focus was no longer on the core characters, which is always a mistake, I think, in a second season. Third season, and it will end, I think, a disappointment. The first season will always stand as a wonderful, remarkable piece of television. The 2 seasons following that, I think, were a letdown. I don't know who's to blame for that, if anybody. Now then, ET Canada. That's what you said is going right. Cheryl Hickey, you had her on recently.
Yes, from Owen Sound, Ontario. Yep.
I'll tell you, back some years ago, this might be, 10, 12, perhaps years ago, in my column in the Globe and Mail, I wrote something funny or sarcastic about Cheryl Hickey and her style of interviewing on ET Canada. And the next day when I went into the office, there was the biggest bouquet of flowers I have ever seen sitting outside my door from Cheryl Hickey.
Wow.
She had a sense of humor about it, which I appreciated. I didn't keep the flowers. I shared them with people in the office. And I told them they were from Cheryl Hickey.
That's awesome.
It was a thank you from Cheryl to the Globe and Mail, kind of this national newspaper. That's a really interesting one, that show ending, because I remember when there was a change in the content regulations. This goes back quite a few years, and shows like entertainment shows that covered Canadian and international entertainment were suddenly counted as real Canadian content. They did not. It meant that the broadcaster had to put fewer dollars into drama, comedy, documentaries, and this kind of coverage could genuinely count. It was never my thing. I rarely got anything out of ET Canada or its equivalents. The fact that it's time to pull the plug on it suggests to me that there's a change in the culture as well that is probably glaringly obvious, which is that most people get their entertainment news, including like short interviews, fashion, all of that. They get that from social media.
Right.
You know, if a show like ET Canada is not creating viral moments, then it's really dead in the water. Again, I wish everybody well, and I know some good people worked on that show, but I don't know if we'll ever see that kind of show again, if it even works these days.
Yeah, I agree, and you're right. It's not that there's competition from other shows like it. It's that the competition is all in everybody's pocket or hand, and that's making it really hard to drive a show like that has a lot of people working on it. But boy, you summed up all the rest of those so well, John. It's like you should be writing a TV column.
No way.
Yeah.
No way.
I'm going to cut down to two last topics here. This is one that I think you flagged. This whole deal about HBO and the chairman and the CEO of HBO, Casey Bloys, he apologized for tasking employees with creating fake Twitter accounts to attack TV critics. Imagine. This came out I can't believe it. This came out in Rolling Stone. Now, that's ridiculous. That could never happen in Canada, right, John?
That was my immediate reaction to reading that story. Hold on a minute. You mean these top executives in American TV? Some of them are actually like Canadian TV executives, where they are thin-skinned and pay too much attention to what critics or columnists say, and complain to the editor and send angry notes around and want somebody on the staff to attack me or you on social media. It has happened in Canada, which speaks to the smallness of the industry and how petty it often is here. If you're not praising something, you will be attacked. I think it interests me that the Rolling Stone story came about because of a lawsuit. Somebody is suing HBO. I think it's they left, and they're suing because they felt unfairly dealt with when they left their position. And as part of the lawsuit, they made it clear some of the things that the HBO executive was making them do, such as having fake Twitter accounts to go after TV critics. And that's how it came out. And it's a good thing it came out. The guy has apologized, as he should. But it leads to, I think, an interesting assumption or assertion, which is that certainly in the US, television critics matter. There is still a small army of people writing about television in the US for all the major outlets, newspapers, magazines, online, and writing well. It's a good area to read. I still read some of my former counterparts regularly. But writing about television matters. And it's, even if the people at the top are thin-skinned about it, it's what you end up understanding is that it matters what people write about television. That leads us to, I don't think there's any point in going on at length about this, but there is very little writing about television in Canada these days.
Well, you brought this up. I mean, is there anybody reviewing television in Canadian papers or online? Like, what happened? Where did it?
Only in the slightest way.
Yeah.
I wasn't replaced at the Globe and Mail. I didn't expect them to immediately attempt to replace me. I had a strong voice and had been there for some years. Not easy for someone else to step into that role. But there has really been nothing. I mean, occasional freelance pieces, some written by good friends of ours. The movie critic is doing some TV recommendations, and often it shows that he's a movie guy, not a nuanced television critic. The Star does very little. I don't think Deborah Yo is full time doing it for the Star. There was very little. There was you online. I mean, you could be the last man standing.
Well, barely standing, but it is fascinating to see it go away like that. I know that that was the line that the movie and TV critics were the canaries in the coal mine when it came to the downsizing of the newspapers and everything. But it does seem, and even as you mentioned, how the movie critic is doing the occasional TV piece, that's because really all the filmmakers are making television shows now, like the independent film voices that used to take created all those great movies in the 70s. They're all taking them to FX and to HBO and to streaming services, aren't they? So you really, if you're a movie critic, you almost have to be reviewing television now.
That's not something I agree with, because I mean, I think in some instances, if there's no TV critic, the movie critic is doing it in a half-hearted manner because he or she really wants to be writing about movies. That's their field. That's their arena. They've spent years plowing that field. They want to nourish it. I think in Canada, newspapers that deliberately diminished TV criticism made a grave mistake because television became the most popular and important storytelling medium of our time. Mm-hmm. We may be seeing the sort of end of peak TV simply in terms of the amount of television that's available. But television is still what people talk about. There is a lot of television. There are so many services available to find television on. People need a guide. People need someone to help them find the kind of television they're interested in. In the US, you have seen nothing like the deliberate diminishment of the coverage of television that you have in Canada.
Yeah, you're right. And who do they name one or two of the Americans that you follow that the critics that are reviewing TV there still?
Judy Berman at Time magazine, I think, is a superb critic. She's a young woman, very smart, well-read. I like her take. She's unpredictable. I like her writing style. I trust her recommendations. Some you will know, Alan Sepinwall, now at Rolling Stone, is someone I always enjoy reading. Dan Feinberg at The Hollywood Reporter. It's one thing that's happened, I think, the trades, like The Hollywood Reporter, Variety, have become stronger in terms of their coverage, especially their critical writing about television. And I occasionally read some in the British papers, but I find the British papers tend to be very out of touch with television these days.
Huh. Wow. Really? Why?
Let's say they're very British. Their approach to television that comes from other countries tends to be very parochial. And occasionally there are people who write wittily about television in the British press, but not so much as there used to be. Uh, I just read them less than I used to.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. It's, it might be an interesting, and hopefully we'll check back again in 6 months or so when hopefully the actors' strike is resolved and things are coming back up to full speed. But a lot of people are suggesting now that it'll never be that speed of peak TV, that was just an unsustainable, creatively unsustainable, financially unsustainable. Do you think we're going to see a new world in terms of making and watching and television?
I don't know if it's a new world. I think it will change slightly. I think you hit the nail on the head somewhat. It's about peak TV, just in terms of the sheer volume of television, the sheer amount of television being made is going to go down. That was unsustainable. We're not seeing as many truly great TV shows as we did a few years ago, but we are still seeing great TV. I mean, I think this year, I just wrote down a few things. The Last of Us, that HBO saw, a masterpiece of television, and there were standalone episodes that were genius. Also, a sober show, a show that's really about loss, entertaining at the same time. The Bear, the second season of The Bear, great television. FX show. Hunk on Earth, that documentary from the UK, that fake documentary series that was on Netflix. An interesting thing I think about television right now, and this is a sort of post-peak TV phenomenon, is that often good television doesn't fit into a recognizable genre. Before, there was things were more firmly, you could more firmly put things in a certain box in television. No, you can't. There are shows that have a different style, a different tone often than you used to get. So I will finish with some recommendations, which people still stop me on the street and ask me to write, to mention shows that they might not have heard about. There's a show called Mrs. Davis, which is on Crave, which originated on Peacock. It is crazy, but it's smart. It's set in an alternative universe, but also recognizable as 2023. A good deal of it is about artificial intelligence, but it's also funny. There's action in it. That was a surprise to me that it was that good. I mentioned Abbott Elementary. I hope that comes back. A show I've been enjoying is The Other Two, which is also, I think, a HBO Max original. It's on Crave. It must be 2 or 3 seasons now. Yep. Hard to define what it is, but it's a brother-sister who somehow get involved in show business. Their mother lands a daytime talk show. It's a satire of television. It's a satire of the entertainment business. It can vary wildly in content. Sometimes it's actually very sweet. Sometimes it's very sexy. Sometimes it's outrageously, viciously satirizing the entertainment business in the States. That's the Other Two. I get a kick out of it anyway. Little Bird, which I don't think has got enough attention. Little Bird, made here in Canada by APTN and Crave. It's been airing on PBS in the States recently. It's an Indigenous drama. It's centered around events during the so-called 60s scoop. And it's getting praise from people like Judy Berman at Time Magazine, I think, because it's good, but it's not a masterpiece. It deals with sensitive topics with a certain amount of melodrama, but not too much melodrama. It's It's a different approach to an Indigenous story and admirable in many ways.
Yeah, and it's about it's a young girl removed from her home in Saskatchewan, adopted into a Montreal Jewish family at the age of 5. This, as you suggested in a note to me, seems like a perfect show for CBC.
Yes, you would wish it was a CBC show.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if they had shopped it there, but APTN and PBS is where you'll find it now. John, those are great recommendations, and I'm going to check out Mrs. Davis, which I haven't yet, but I'll leave you with one last question. Pardon me?
It will blow your mind, Bill.
Okay, well, I'm looking for that. When you were a young kid growing up in Ireland, there was this show that started Doctor Who. And he's back at the end of the month. I've talked to you about this before, and you basically told me that because you grew up watching it, it was like the Friendly Giant to you. It was just like a kid's show, right? Are you any more into it now, or do you give it any attention?
No, I don't. I'm not a Doctor Who geek. I'm not a Doctor Who geek, and I don't want to be a Doctor Who geek.
I think it's hilarious they turn this into like a Marvel superhero show. Like, to me, I think the best show you could possibly make in Canada right now would be to take the Friendly Giant and turn him into a Marvel superhero. Just like where he's like the Hulk running amok across Canada, chasing Rusty and Jerome. Anyway, that won't happen. John,
pitch that, Bill.
I just did. Always so much fun talking to you. Wish you well. Thank you for giving up some time to talk today, and hopefully we'll get to see each other live and in person very soon.
Thank you, Bill. Always a pleasure. I look forward to every time we do this, and I hope we do it soon again. Take care, Bill.
You too, John. Thank you. A special thanks this episode to Phil Hong, who engineered the whole thing from Denpasar, the capital of the province of Bali in Indonesia. I kid you not, as Jack Parr used to say. Happy vacation, Phil, to you and Pearl, and thanks for establishing a Brio TV international office in such a beautiful corner of the planet. Thanks as well to BJ Del Conte and all the Crispy Critters for the Varsity Blues music used on these episodes, even as I speak. Thank you, most of all, to you, listener. If you liked what you heard, tell your friends. I'm Bill Brio. Thanks for listening.